Okay, thank you. So let's get started. Please tell us about your background, a little bit about your background. And I guess you grew up in California, but you also lived in Mexico, which is a unique journey. Can you share how your experiences will help Californians achieve a more human and prosperous future?
Well, I'm actually born and raised in California, went to college in San Diego, and then I lived 4 years in the Dominican Republic in my 20s, and then I lived 20 years in Mexico until about 18 months ago. And both places I lived and worked, I wasn't there just vacationing or hanging out. And my mother was a very interesting woman, and her best friend since 12 years old and they were the same age till her friend died at the age of 85. They were joined at the hip, and her best friend was a first generation Mexican-American woman. So my mother decided that all of her children were going to have to learn Spanish because my mom spoke it okay, and she just wanted us to all know Spanish. So starting at 2 years old in the house, we had to listen to Berlitz albums in Spanish. And that was for years and years. And I took it for 5 years when I was in Catholic school. And then I lived overseas, and then I lived in Spanish-speaking places for over a third of my life. So I've actually used Spanish my entire life, professionally, etc., in almost everything I've done. And so living outside the country and being cross-cultural, which is something you can identify with, gives somebody a very unique perspective. It opens your eyes to other cultures and to other ways people think and how they hold power and how they hold economy and all the other things that impact our lives. So I'm really grateful to my mom, and I'm grateful for the experiences I've had. Your question, how can this help guide being governor of California? Well, first of all, 43% of the population is Hispanic Californian. And by the middle of the 2050s, it'll be over 50%. The fact is that historically, California has had, I lived for 20 years it's strangely enough, even though I lived in Mexico, it was the first capital of California. It was the first church and first settlement of California, and that was Loreto in the state of Baja California Sur. And that is where the expeditions left from to found the missions up in Alta California, which is the California that we know now, including San Diego as the first one. And it was the capital of all the Californias for almost 90 years. So because of my orientation, I have really good working knowledge of Mexican culture and Dominican culture, and by extension, other Latin cultures because of my language, my ability to communicate. And I think understanding that we have this enormous opportunity to bring this entire demographic into the new technological revolution that's upon us. And the way our schools are set up and the way that our benefits programs and our high cost of living, it is not conducive right now to this sector of our population that they would advance rapidly. And they need to, because if California is going to embrace the future and this technological revolution that we're in the middle of, then we're going to have to be really good at educating all of our people, not just the immigrants and not just the Hispanics, but all of them. So one of the things I've paid particular attention to is the future of education in the state. It can't be this system that's 450 years old, one size fits all. We're spending the most money, almost the most money, it depends on which month, but we're in the top 3 states in the country at about $30,000 per student. And it's not working. We're 35th in reading, we're 38th in math, and over 30%, only 30% of high school graduates can read at an 8th grade level in California that come out of public school. And yet here are these people who I know intimately from having worked with them many years that are incredibly intelligent, incredibly industrious, hardworking, family-oriented people. So the question is, how do we now recast the state so that it actually is not only welcoming to them, but we can envision together a prosperous, a safe, a healthy, and a peaceful future for everybody. And this is what we need to focus on, is that future.
Very good.
I can bring a lot to that. I think I can bring a lot to that process, and that's why I'm a candidate.
Fantastic, thank you. And Tom, could you explain now, just moving forward, the significance of the origins of your party's name? I think everybody's a little curious, to know more about the Libertarian Party and also about the name. It's a unique name, and I'm sure there's a historical significance attached to it, So could you just briefly let us know?
Well, the word libertarian comes from French libertaire. And that was how the French, they adopted the concept, which was actually written about before that. It was embodied in the American Revolution. You hear the word liberty a lot, the Liberty Bell, et cetera. Liberty is a word that just means basically freedom. But if you fast forward through all the history of, the 1800s, when it became associated with kind of the revolutionary anarchist revolution and communism, actually, early communism. And finally, when we got into the 20th century, there started to be a lot written about a return to libertarian principles, and that's how the word was used in literature, etc. Finally, the party was formed in 1971. But what does it really stand for? As opposed to the two major parties, which are fairly pragmatic, if you try to find out what they stand for, it's drifted over time. It kind of morphs according to the circumstances and according to the politics of the time. Whereas a Libertarian Party is more of an operating philosophy for how government should operate. And it embodies minimal government. It embodies personal freedom, personal responsibility, free markets, and lack of government interference in the basic freedoms that everybody should enjoy. It embodies lack of aggression towards other human beings. At the same time, unless there's violence or extortion or coercion, which is also violence. And so the philosophy itself is a philosophy of freedom, where the people that are free also take responsibility for themselves, and they don't count on large government for their sustenance. They count on themselves, and they count on free markets and entrepreneurialism and, like Adam Smith said, the guiding hand.
Invisible hand, yeah.
Of freedom, invisible hand, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Now, let's move forward and talk about a kind of a contentious issue here in California. So California has approximately 2.5 million undocumented immigrants. You support secure borders and the deportation of criminals, while also proposing merit-based, pathway to citizenship for these productive, immigrants, but not amnesty. So could you elaborate a little bit on your approach and proposal?
Well, amnesty was created to help people that were in war zones and or persecuted, like what happened in World War II, etc. So that was how amnesty came about. Whereas immigration, voluntary immigration, where people aren't fleeing emergencies, is something somewhat different. The last administration, the federal administration, actually used a laissez-faire attitude and actually incented massive immigration into the United States. I've lived in what's called the third world. I've worked in Dominican Republic and Haiti, and I've seen abject, desperate poverty, of which there's about 950 million people in the world that are living in abject poverty now. The United States could not offer sanctuary for 950 million people. It's not possible. Well, I believe that we have to be that we're an immigrant country. Immigrant vigor is what has made the United States great. The diversity of people coming from other places that wanted just the freedom to operate, to raise a family, to make money, and to have economy and income is what built our country. And the United States largely has provided that for many, many people. We need to have rules about how many people we can take in, and they need to be coherent rules. That was violated in the years 2021 to 2025. Who knows the real number? I've tried to find that out, and it's all over the map. But if you could take between 10 and 18 million, and those are the numbers of people that entered the United States under this amnesty program or sanctuary program. And and the problem with that is the federal government actually incented them. They got them here, they gave them money, and they gave them housing, and they gave them a stipend per month and health care in some circumstances. And so if you were living in a place, especially places that we've impacted, for example, with the drug trade. Now, when I lived in Mexico, I saw from 2006 to 2018, over 100,000 Mexicans were killed by a program that we instituted. And that was the capture and extradition of major drug cartel leaders to the United States to go into prison in the United States where they could be held. The internal chaos that created in Mexico meant that now there were fights over territory and who was going to control this. Right now, it's a $350 billion a year business of illegal drugs in the United States that come from Mexico. And I've told people, if you could push a button and all of a sudden everybody in the drug trade in Mexico just vanished, disappeared, right down to the errand boys and the wash ladies that took care of people's clothes that are involved, etc. Within a couple of weeks, it would start filling back in again because the demand for these drugs, which is illegal, has motored that industry. We have a historical analog to that. It was called Prohibition. It was 1917 to 1930. When we prohibited alcohol, it became illegal. Just during those 13 years, it engendered so much criminality in the United States and criminal empires. Some of them still exist today, because whenever you outlaw something that has a demand, and there's going to continue to be a demand, you drive the supply underground and illegal. And the result of that was we couldn't control the criminality in our own country at the time, and we ultimately repealed it in 1930. Mexico has been on free spool for over 80 years, and now we have the largest, most sophisticated, wealthiest criminal empires of all time in human history. That's not necessary, but that has created an enormous amount of misery, of people fleeing that in other countries and in Mexico, and part of our immigration problem has to do with that. I know families that have fled violence from cartels. I know them personally. So how do we solve that? A libertarian principle is that we should allow people individual freedom and victimless crimes where they should not be congesting our legal system, etc. But here we have this problem where I would like to have rules, steady immigration. We need it. We're not reproducing to reproductive rate, even break-even rates in the United States, nor in California, by the way. So we're going to need immigration at some point, but it has to be ordered and it has to be according to rules. So what to do about the majority of these people that came in under the last administration? If they're criminals, then we need to capture them and get them out of our society. I believe in that because that is a danger to the rights and the freedoms of people that are here that are not criminals. And that's a type of violence. So we need to deal with that strongly, but at the same time, we need to realize, wait a minute, another leader of the US government at the time actually incentivized people to come to the country illegally or in an undocumented fashion, whether they entered at ports of entry or whether they entered through without ports of entry through, escaping over the border somehow or penetrating the border. We need to be smart and we need to be intelligent. And a lot of these people are hardworking. They're seeking another life. They embody the freedoms that people have always sought in America. We need to find a way for a pathway to citizenship for non-criminal immigrants. And I believe that as the governor, what I would do is I would negotiate strongly with Washington, D.C., so that I would ask, given us to that California would have a special dispensation on this issue, where we could have a pathway to citizenship for people that are here, raising their families and wanting to participate as good citizens in the economy of this wonderful state. In exchange, I would cooperate with federal agencies, but I would do it in the way that all state law enforcement would handle the capture, identification, and capture, along with federal input, of criminals within our society that are dangerous and need to be deported. And I would capture them and have federal agents gather them at our jails and our prisons, et cetera, and not out in the general public, which they're not really trained for and they're not good at. And that's what's creating the chaos and the demonstrations and all that. I would then find, on top of that, I would ask that they leave hardworking people alone that are trying to relocate here and becoming part of the new California. And that would be my position.
And just to finalize your comment on this, would you say that 10 or 20% of the California population should have an international workforce, or you envision much less, like 15% should be, the ideal number perhaps for the international workers? It is hard to make it.
No, I don't. I would never even assign a percentage to that. I think that people are people, they're human beings all around the world. I have friends from every continent except Antarctica, and I have a lot of friends that have visited Antarctica. But I don't, that's not how I look at things. I'm a bit of a cosmic egalitarian, and I believe all people are equal. They're not equally gifted, but they're equal. And so if somebody's not a criminal and they're looking to better their life, let's have them bettered in California if that's their real impetus, and they're willing to blend and to work hard and to raise their family here, etc. Now, if they commit violence, which is criminal violence, it's fraud, it's theft, it's receiving largesse from government benefits instead of working because they're lazy or for whatever reason, that's violence and taking the resources of other people, and I'm against that.
Right. Perfect. Now, moving forward, how do you envision the economic freedom for California? I thought it was very interesting that you put that in your platform. And could you elaborate on your proposed policies, such as the suspending fuel taxes? You can be brief or you can extend yourself, but I would like to know regarding the cap and trade and the low carbon fuel standard. These are all current things that are happening right now, and this is related also to climate change.
Well, so I'm going to say one thing that a lot of people say, oh my gosh, that's kind of controversial. And then I'll say another thing that completely makes it not controversial, okay? The first thing is that I'm not somebody, and I've had a very interesting life involved in this issue. I'm not somebody that believes that there's runaway global warming based on atmospheric CO2. And I've written about it, I've debated it, I am in touch with many climate scientists about it, etc. But I don't want to make it an issue, because there's so many people that have been convinced. They may not understand the science of it, they may not understand all the nuances or the history or how it came about or how it had political origins, not scientific origins, etc. Since they believe in it, it's important to take into account and say, okay, I do not want to engage and fight within the polarity that's been created on issues like this, which are narratives, which if there's a discussion about it, great, count me in. But in the meantime, I'm proposing something very different, but it's based on my own life. California has the highest gasoline and fuel prices in the country. It also has the highest energy prices. tied most of the time with other states like New York, et cetera, but it's the highest. Why? Because they've decided in their political ideology is the atmospheric CO2 is causing runaway warming. So they've instituted a series of rules, regulations, laws, fees, payments, taxes, etc., in order to control carbon emissions. Well, I looked at that and I said, here we are. The other day in Los Angeles, I have a picture of gasoline at $8.10 a gallon. And we have closed 34 refineries in California since 1991, 5 in the last year. We've also seen the closure or the suspension of the San Pablo Bay pipeline, which was the pipeline that carried oil, but crude oil from the oil fields in Bakersfield and Kern to the Bay Area to the refineries. Now that's shut down. We don't have a way to transport oil. You can't do it overland. We don't have railways like that. So we can't get it now, California oil to those refineries. So what are we doing? And why can't we get them to those refineries? And why can't that pipeline make money? It was losing $2 million a month. Why? Because of the rules that have been put on it for carbon recapture, for cap and trade, for excise taxes, for special fuel grades, for percentage biodiesel sales, etc. Those are all ideas to limit the amount of carbon dioxide that's emitted in the burning of hydrocarbons. Now let's take a look at something else. In my life, I've started a nonprofit that's now 42 years old, and it's working in 10 countries in reforestation. This year, it will pass. It loans money to small farmers, poor farmers, mountain farmers, to convert to tree crops, which save their soil, save their farms, and they make a lot more money at, but it takes a while before they have an economic threshold that they can make money at. It takes a while for trees to grow, even rapid growing ones like what we use. So given that, this organization is going to cross the 100 million trees planted this year. And the nursery that we founded produced another 105 million seedlings for other groups and organizations in the Dominican Republic. So we're basically at 200 million trees in the last 42 years. If California, which has 15 million acres that are damaged by bark beetle infestation, by wildfires, and by overexploitation in its time, we have, earmark that for a minute, we have 15 million acres that could be reforested and forests restored that are currently in very bad shape. We also have 80 to 100,000 Gen Zers that are leaving the state every year because they can't afford to live here. They can't afford to have a family. They can't afford to own a home. There's no jobs to find because they're being squeezed out, and they're living sometimes 5 or 6 to an apartment and doing whatever they can. But oftentimes 80 to 100,000 are leaving the state every year. We can't afford to lose them. That's our future. Those are our young people. Those are our entrepreneurs and our future business leaders and our future scientists and all that. So now let's get to this problem, because it solves about 5 things at once. If we cancel the cap and trade and the carbon recapture and the excise taxes and the rules and the fuel standards, etc., and the carbon recapture, we would have gasoline from California crude oil under $4 a gallon. Now, for every $1 a gallon that we lower fuel prices, just count that that's $15 billion a year in California's pockets. So if we could do that, now what are we going to do? Because all these people believe in atmospheric CO2 being the problem. Well, guess what? Let's plant 3 billion trees and use 100,000 youths in a special program costing $8 billion a year. And over the 25 years from now to 2051, we could plant those 3 billion trees and reforest that 15 million acres that California has. Now, what would that give us? It would give us increased water flows to the Pacific. It would give us increased wildlife habitat. It would give increased groundwater replenishment. It will give us also employment for 100,000 Gen Zers. Say, start at 18 years old to 28 years old. You can go in for 2 years. And once you graduate from this program, the program would pay $1,600 a month only with room, board, and health insurance. Now, when you graduate, here's a $30,000 scholarship to use any way you want. You want to start a business, you want to buy a modular home, do you want to further your education, etc., but you're not in debt. And you've had this experience that a lot of California youth are missing, and that is to be in the outdoors, planting the 3 billion trees, restoring wetlands, and also clearing brush and creating fire breaks for fire prevention for the future, doing forestry management that we haven't done to date. And so my proposal is that I would, on an emergency basis, cancel those costs for that are impacting not only fuel, by the way, for cars and trucks and transport, but also energy. The same goes for the restrictions put on natural gas generated electricity, which most of our electricity still is. So this program would solve about 5 problems at once, and it would fix 3 times the atmospheric CO2 as the current regulations. Now imagine this. We think we're being more green by saying we don't want as much CO2 emitted in our refineries and all that. So what's happened? 30% of our fuels are going to be refined offshore, and we're going to ship them across the Pacific this year, refined by China, refined by India, and coming from other places. We're going to ship that across the ocean in tankers that use bunker fuel. They don't have the same standards for refining fuels as California did, even under the old rules. So we're emitting 38% more CO2 into the atmosphere, and we're getting 30% of our fuel, and by the way, 70% of our jet fuel, from outside the country and from places that probably shouldn't have any control over our fuel sourcing. Instead, we could be the lowest cost producer if we keep everything in California. We create an enormous amount of jobs again. Probably it's an estimated 100,000 jobs just there. And our cost for fuel would be lower. Now, I am a believer in the environment. I'm just not a believer in atmospheric CO2. But I don't have to be, because about 20 years from now, we're going to have fusion power. I doubt I'll be here to see it, but guess what? It's coming, and the first commercial reactor is going to come online in France in 2007. This is coming, and it'll create cheap, abundant energy. In the meantime, we need to let the market decide and the actual producers decide and serve the market in a free manner so that we can have the lowest costs possible. My proposal would eliminate this incredibly high cost of energy, and that would prime the economy for an incredible recovery, because if we lower that cost, everything we do, including food production, agriculture, construction, transport of materials and things that we buy, would be lower, and our costs would be lower, and that would save an enormous amount of money for Californians that could be plowed back in their families, their economies, their businesses, etc.
That sounds very promising, very interesting.